By the time my sister pointed at the front door and told me to leave her anniversary dinner, every face at the table had already chosen a side. I stood there holding the dessert I had paid for while my mother stared at her wine glass, and my brother smirked like he had been waiting years for this. What none of them knew was that one message already drafted on my phone could destroy the lie our family had built its whole life around tonight, before anyone tasted cake. My name is Ava Mercer, and until that night, I still believed blood loyalty meant something when everything else fell apart. That dinner was supposed to be simple. My sister Natalie had rented the private back room of a polished little restaurant outside Charlotte, all soft lighting, expensive candles, and plates too large for the portions on them. She said it was an intimate family celebration for her wedding anniversary, but the minute I walked in, I felt the air shift. My chair had been moved to the end of the table farthest from everyone else. My mother gave me a smile so tight it looked painful. My brother Mason did not even pretend to be polite. Natalie kissed my cheek like she was blessing a problem she had already decided to remove. I should have left then. Instead, I sat down, smoothed my dress, and tried to ignore the old familiar humiliation crawling up my spine. In my family, I was the useful daughter, until the room needed a villain. Natalie was the golden one, the polished one, the one who could rewrite a disaster as if she had invented grace itself. Mason was the son who failed loudly and got forgiven even louder. I was the one who cleaned up messes, balanced accounts, remembered birthdays, covered emergencies, and somehow still got treated like I carried the storm into every room I entered. If you are listening because you have ever been punished for telling the truth in your own family, stay with me. Before this gets worse, tell me where you are watching from. Press like if you know how cold family silence can feel, and subscribe if you want the full story of how one dinner table became the beginning of a reckoning none of them saw coming. Because the real betrayal did not begin at that restaurant. It began months earlier, the first time I noticed money moving where it should not have moved at all. I worked as operations manager for Mercer Home Staging, the family company my father built before he died. On paper, Natalie handled brand partnerships and client relations. Mason floated between sales, special projects, and whatever title would make him sound employed that week. My mother Diane held the majority family trust after my father passed, though she rarely involved herself in day-to-day work. I handled payroll, vendor contracts, inventory tracking, and cash flow. In plain terms, I made sure the business stayed alive, while everyone else posed beside it. For years I told myself that arrangement was temporary. My father had trusted me with the systems because I was careful, and after his death I stayed because grief can disguise itself as duty. I was not only preserving a company, I was preserving the last place where my father had looked at me like my steadiness was something to admire, not something to exploit. The first red flag looked small enough to dismiss. A vendor payment for custom dining furniture had been duplicated and rerouted through a consulting account I did not recognize. The amount was high but not catastrophic. I called accounting expecting a clerical explanation. Instead, I got a nervous pause and a vague answer about a temporary allocation adjustment approved by Natalie. Natalie had no authority to approve allocation changes without my review. I checked the ledger again. There were more. Not enough to trigger an outside audit, but enough to form a pattern. Catering invoices padded by service fees. Marketing reimbursements issued twice. Inventory that had supposedly been sold to clients but was still sitting in our warehouse with new tags attached. A staging truck leased in the company name that Mason had been using for weekend trips to Atlanta. Personal restaurant bills buried under executive hospitality. A luxury spa charge listed as client retention. Airline tickets flagged as site visits for properties no one in our database had ever touched. By the end of that week, my chest felt tight every time I opened the books. I printed reports and took them home. Spread across my kitchen table, the numbers stopped looking messy and started looking intentional. Somebody was not skimming out of desperation. Somebody was treating the company like a private wallet. I requested a formal internal review. Natalie laughed. Not privately, not kindly. Right there in the conference room with glass walls and 3 junior employees pretending not to hear, she leaned back and said, "Ava, this is why no one lets you handle public-facing work. You see fraud everywhere because you do not understand strategy." Mason added, "Maybe if you had a personal life you would stop trying to date the spreadsheet." The room went still. That was how it always happened. I raised a concern. They turned it into a flaw in my personality. My caution became paranoia. My competence became bitterness. Their carelessness became charm. And because families build these roles slowly, over years of repeated humiliation, everybody around us learned the script too. I asked again more directly who approved the consulting transfers. Natalie folded her arms. Mother did. That answer landed badly because my mother hated paperwork and avoided financial decisions unless someone practically put a pen in her hand. I went to Diane that evening and asked whether she had authorized a set of consulting disbursements tied to a shell vendor called Blue Aster Advisory. She looked at me blankly. Then she said Natalie told me those were standard tax efficiency structures. I trusted her. I showed her the paperwork. She did not study it for more than a few seconds. She only sighed and pressed her fingers to her temple. Your sister is carrying a lot. Please do not start another war. Another war. Not an investigation, not concern over missing money. A war. As though asking where company assets had gone was the rude part, not taking them. That was when I understood something uglier than theft was happening. It was not only embezzlement, it was family favoritism weaponized into policy. Natalie could empty drawers and call it leadership. Mason could waste company resources and still get defended as misunderstood. I could save them from collapse and still get treated like the disturbance. I dug deeper. Blue Aster Advisory did not have a real office. It had a mailbox in a strip shipping center outside Raleigh. The listed incorporator was a friend of Mason's from college, with a history of dissolved ventures and unpaid state taxes. Another vendor, Stonewake Logistics, billed us monthly for warehouse transfer services that our own internal fleet already handled. Stonewake was tied to an address that matched a townhouse Natalie's husband had quietly purchased through a holding company the previous year. My father had not left a company, he had left a feeding trough. The discovery that hollowed me out most was the trust paperwork. After Dad died, we were told ownership would remain balanced with operational authority determined by role and performance. That was the language my mother used every time I asked about long-term governance. Balanced, fair, respectful of everyone's strengths. It was a lie. An amended trust memorandum had been filed months after the funeral. It gave Natalie emergency authority to liquidate assets to preserve business continuity, with Mason entitled to discretionary distributions under family hardship provisions. My name was still on paper, but only as salaried management, not protected equity. I had been working like an heir and protected like an employee they could replace after enough gaslighting. I read the document 3 times before the words settled into rage. My father would never have designed it that way, which meant either my mother had changed it under Natalie's influence, or they had manipulated her when grief made her easiest to steer. I confronted Natalie in her office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She was posting anniversary photos for her brand account, smiling into a ring light, while one of our assistants unpacked garments she had ordered on the company card. I shut the door and placed copies of the Blue Aster and Stonewake files on her desk. Her smile disappeared, but not from fear, from irritation, like I had interrupted something prettier than the truth. You forged approval paths, I said. You billed personal spending through operating accounts. Mason used company assets off book, and somebody altered the trust authority structure without proper disclosure. Natalie glanced down, then back up. You really should not say words like forged unless you are prepared to prove them. I am prepared. She stood slowly adjusting the cuff of her blazer. Ava, you have always had this tragic little martyr complex. You think doing the unglamorous work makes you morally superior. It makes me the one who noticed. It makes you the one who does not understand leverage. That word again, leverage. As if ethics were for people too unsophisticated to exploit systems. I asked whether she had used company money to fund her husband's real estate holding. She smiled then, and I still remember how cold it was. What exactly do you think this family owes you? She asked. Not what do you think happened. Not let us discuss this, not even deny it. What do you think this family owes you? I stared at her. She kept going. You were never the face of this business. Father knew that. You are efficient, yes. Dependable, yes. But you do not attract clients. You do not inspire loyalty. You make yourself useful and then resent the people actually want in the room. I should say that insult did not hurt because it was new. It hurt because it had been sharpened for years. Natalie had always known where to place the blade. Then Mason walked in without knocking, took one look at the papers and laughed. So she found the grown-up stuff. I asked him whether he had signed off on Stonewake. He leaned against the frame and said, "Do you know how exhausting it is? Ava, watching you act like keeping receipts makes you a saint?" Their contempt was so casual it chilled me more than panic would have. Panic would have meant limits. This confidence meant protection. They believed they could belittle me out of reality because it had worked my entire life. The final insult came from my mother. I asked her to meet me at home that Sunday. I laid everything out across the dining room table where we used to do school projects when Dad was still alive. Bank records, vendor registrations, duplicate reimbursements, altered authority language. I told her this was not sibling friction. This was fraud tied to estate manipulation. She sat down very carefully as if the paperwork might stain her. Then she said the sentence that changed something in me for good. "You need to stop trying to ruin your sister because you cannot stand that your father trusted her differently." I felt the room tilt, not because I had never been blamed unfairly before, because in that moment she admitted the truth without meaning to. She knew trust had been distributed differently. She knew I had been kept in the dark. And instead of asking whether Natalie had stolen from the company, she asked why I could not bear my place. "Did you know?" I asked. Her eyes moved away from mine. That was enough. Not full confession, not detail, enough. I left that house shaking, sat in my car for nearly an hour, and had the first truly disloyal thought of my life. If they wanted to make me the family enemy, then I was done protecting the family name. I did not go to the police yet. I did not alert our bank. I did something more careful first. I archived everything. I backed up internal records to an encrypted drive. I copied approval chains, tax filings, signature comparisons, expense audits, and access logs. I pulled building entry records showing Mason in the office on dates he later claimed he was out of state. I secured a voicemail from a vendor who complained that Natalie had demanded 2 invoice versions, one clean and one full. I gathered enough to raise questions, but not yet enough to survive the counterattack I knew was coming. And then Natalie invited the family to her anniversary dinner. The timing was too neat. The week before the dinner, she had stripped my access from 2 financial dashboards, citing a software security update. Mason told staff I was taking a mental health step back from higher-level decisions. One assistant accidentally forwarded me an internal thread where Natalie described me as emotionally volatile around succession issues. They were building the narrative before they made the move. They wanted me isolated, discredited, and easy to remove, so I went to the dinner anyway. Not because I still hoped for reconciliation, because I wanted to see how bold liars become when they think the person they betrayed is still begging to belong. The private room at the restaurant had one long table, one wall of mirrors, and just enough ambient music to make cruelty sound tasteful. Natalie had arranged the seating with precision. She sat at the center near her husband Trevor, wearing a cream dress designed to suggest innocence while demanding attention. My mother sat to her right. Mason sat across from them, loose and smug, already working through a cocktail like the night belonged to him. 2 family friends were there, along with our longtime attorney, Harold Baines, whose presence made my stomach tighten before the appetizers even arrived. Harold never attended sentimental dinners. He attended strategy. That was when I realized this evening was not only social, it was procedural theater. Natalie wanted witnesses. The first 20 minutes were all polished conversation. Trevor praised Natalie's devotion. My mother dabbed at her eyes over a toast about resilience after loss. Mason made a joke about old family chaos finally settling down. Harold smiled into his water glass and said very little. Then the papers appeared, not literally placed in front of us at once. That would have been crude. Natalie nodded to Harold and he cleared his throat and announced that given the company's recent internal strain, it might be wise to discuss a formal leadership restructuring in the spirit of harmony. Harmony. That was the word men like Harold used when power had already been redistributed, and all that remained was making the injured party sign something. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. That was the strange thing. Once I understood the shape of the ambush, I stopped feeling confused. Harold explained that Mercer Home Staging needed a refreshed executive model, one that reflected public market realities, client-facing strengths, and family confidence. Natalie would become acting chief executive with expanded discretion. Mason would take on business development and asset mobility. My role would be narrowed to an advisory transition period before a severance package appropriate to my years of service. Years of service, not daughter, not builder, not operational backbone. A long-serving employee being gently removed. I looked at my mother. She would not meet my eyes. That hurt more than Harold, more than Natalie, more than every carefully chosen insult. Betrayal from a sibling can still be filed under rivalry. Betrayal from a parent rearranges your understanding of your own childhood. I asked one question. Was this drafted before tonight? Harold gave the kind of smile lawyers use when they enjoy pretending neutrality. We have been considering options for some time. Natalie folded her hands. Ava, we wanted to handle this privately with dignity. Privately. In front of witnesses at her anniversary dinner while entrapping me into reacting badly enough to validate the story they had already spread. Mason swirled his drink. Take the severance. It is more generous than most people get after undermining their own family. That was the moment I understood the dinner was never about removing me from the company. It was about removing my credibility before I spoke. If I protested, I would be bitter. If I cried, unstable. If I walked out guilty. If I stayed quiet, they would bury me under signatures and social spin by the end of the week. So I did the only thing they had never trained for. I stayed calm. I asked Harold whether he had reviewed the Blue Aster transfers. Silence. Natalie's expression changed by a fraction, but it was enough. Harold set down his glass. I do not know what you are referring to. I looked at Trevor. Did you know company funds paid expenses connected to your townhouse holding company? Trevor blinked, then glanced at Natalie so quickly it almost looked involuntary. Mason straightened in his chair. Do not do this here. Did you know, I repeated, that Stonewake Logistics shares an address chain with your property registration? Natalie cut in, voice clipped now. You are embarrassing yourself. Family friend number 1 looked between us with delighted horror. Family friend number 2 lowered her fork very slowly. Good, I thought. Let them hear it with food still on their plates. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder. Not everything, only enough. Inside were copies of duplicate invoices, routing slips, and the amended trust memorandum language that had quietly erased my protected position while expanding Natalie's liquidation authority. I placed the folder on the table. No, I said. I am embarrassing the people who assumed I would keep protecting them. My mother whispered my name like a warning. I ignored her. I asked Harold whether he had overseen the trust amendment after my father's death, and whether full disclosure had been provided to all named family stakeholders before execution. He did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. Natalie leaned forward. You do not understand estate law. I understand hidden authority shell vendors, padded invoices, asset diversion, and signature sequencing. Mason laughed once, hard and sharp. This is exactly why everyone thinks you are impossible. You collect half facts and build tragedy. That line might have worked on me 6 months earlier. That night it only clarified his role in the script. I turned to the mirrored wall beside us, where our reflections sat under soft gold light like a polished family portrait. Then I looked back at the actual table and said what I had been swallowing for years. You built this family around appearance and called me disloyal every time I noticed substance. The room went still. Natalie recovered first. She always did. She pushed back her chair, stood, and pointed toward the door. Leave. No one moved. She said it again, louder. If you are going to sabotage my anniversary dinner with paranoid accusations, leave. I looked at my mother one last time. Nothing. Not outrage at Natalie, not concern over the documents, just dread that the mask had slipped in front of other people. So I stood, picked up the dessert box I had brought, and walked toward the door. That was the half ending they expected, the humiliating exit. The older sister restored the difficult daughter, removed the room left buzzing with disapproval, aimed in exactly one direction. But at the threshold I stopped. I turned back and said very clearly I did not come here to beg for my place. I came to confirm who was willing to lie in public. Natalie folded her arms. Get out. I nodded. Then I left. The hallway outside the private room smelled like rosemary butter and polished wood. A server asked whether I needed my ticket validated. I said no. My hands were steady now, almost strangely steady. When humiliation burns clean enough, it leaves precision behind. I stood beside a framed black and white photograph near the lobby and opened my phone. The message I had drafted earlier was addressed to 3 people, Our bank's fraud liaison, an external forensic accountant my father once trusted, and a state investigator whose contact information had been given to me months earlier by a client who specialized in corporate compliance disputes. Attached were selected records, not everything but enough to trigger preservation concern, and stop documents from quietly disappearing by morning. I added one final line. Further materials exist, including trust alteration concerns and related party asset diversion. I am willing to cooperate fully. Then I pressed send. That was the first exposure. Not the final blow. Not yet. Just the opening crack in the wall they had mistaken for permanent. A minute later, my phone lit up with a text from Natalie. Do not make this uglier than it already is. I stared at it and almost laughed. Uglier. As if ugly had begun with my message instead of their theft, their contempt, their years of using my labor while teaching me gratitude for exclusion. Then another message arrived, this time from Mason. You have no idea who you are playing with. That one did make me smile because men like Mason only send threats when they feel the floor shift under them. I took screenshots, archived them, sent copies to the same secure folder. Then I walked out into the warm Carolina night and sat in my car with the engine off. I should tell you I felt triumphant. I did not. I felt sick, shaky, grief-stricken in a way that had nothing to do with money. Because once you expose your own family, even for the right reasons, you cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. You stop being the person who still hopes truth will be welcomed at home. You become the person willing to drag lies into daylight and accept whatever dies there. A car pulled out of the restaurant lot, Trevor's, then another, Mason's. My phone rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, she left a message, breath unsteady, voice low and furious in that quiet way mothers reserve for punishment. Ava, you are making a terrible mistake. You do not understand the damage this will do to all of us. All of us. There it was again. The sacred family unit. The shield raised only after they had already used me as the sacrifice under it. I replayed her voicemail twice. Then I saved it. Because for the first time in my life, I was not listening like a daughter begging to be chosen. I was listening like a witness. And deep down, beneath the grief, beneath the nausea, beneath the brutal recognition that my mother had sided with power over truth, another feeling finally began to rise. Relief. Not clean relief, not joyful relief, but the kind that comes when the performance is over and the lights come up on the wreckage. They had forced me out of dinner. They had tried to force me out of the company. They had spent years forcing me out of my own place in the family story. What they did not know yet was that once the bank froze the first review channel and the forensic requests started moving, this would stop being a private family conflict and become something far more dangerous to people who survived on image. It would become a record, and records do not care who mother loves more. The morning after the dinner did not arrive gently. It came with silence and then with movement beneath that silence, the kind you cannot see but can feel pressing against everything you thought was stable. By noon, my access to the main company server had been fully revoked. My work email displayed a suspension notice framed as a temporary security audit. Natalie had moved quickly, which confirmed what I already knew. She was not reacting. She had prepared. But so had I. Before they cut me off, I had already duplicated every essential dataset and stored it across encrypted drives and secured cloud partitions under different credentials. I had learned long ago that survival inside my family required redundancy. If they erased one version of me, another had to exist somewhere else intact and undeniable. Still, evidence alone does not win battles like this. Evidence must be interpreted, validated, supported, and most importantly, believed. So I began building something I had never needed before: allies. The first call I made was to Eleanor Price, the forensic accountant my father once trusted, when a regional competitor tried to accuse him of tax irregularities years earlier. She had a reputation for quiet precision and zero tolerance for manipulation. When I told her my name, there was a pause, then recognition softened her tone. I remember your father, she said. He kept clean books. Someone has not continued that tradition, I replied. I did not dramatize. I presented facts, patterns, and my concerns about internal obstruction. She asked sharp, targeted questions that forced me to refine my narrative. By the end of the call, she agreed to conduct an independent review if I formally retained her. I need full transparency, she added. If you are wrong about any piece, it weakens everything. I am not wrong, I said. and for the first time I heard conviction in my own voice that did not depend on anyone else agreeing. The second person I contacted was Daniel Reeves, the compliance investigator, whose information I had received months earlier. Unlike Eleanor, Daniel spoke bluntly from the start. If what you are describing holds up, he said, this stops being a family dispute. This becomes financial misconduct with possible criminal exposure. Are you ready for that? I looked around my apartment at the stacks of printed records, at the quiet absence of family messages that used to fill my phone with trivial demands. I was not ready yesterday, I answered. Today I am. He did not offer comfort. He offered process, preservation orders, evidence chain integrity, communication discipline. He told me what not to do as much as what to do, which mattered more. Do not warn them again, he said. People who think they are protected become sloppy. Let them keep moving. That advice became the foundation of everything that followed. The third ally came from somewhere I did not expect. Lila Hart, one of our junior coordinators, sent me a message late that evening. It was short, almost hesitant. I know they told everyone you are stepping back. That is not what is happening, is it? I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. No, it is not. Another pause. Then I have seen things that did not make sense. I did not know if I should say anything. That was the moment the emotional weight of the situation shifted. It was no longer only my word against theirs. It was the beginning of a network. We met in a quiet coffee shop the next morning. Lila looked nervous, but determined in a way that reminded me of myself years earlier before caution turned into silence. She told me about duplicate invoice instructions, about Natalie asking for clean versions for official records, about Mason removing tagged inventory without logging it properly, about a conversation she overheard where Natalie said, "As long as Ava handles the books, we can always redirect before she finalizes anything." That sentence alone explained so much. I had not been excluded because I was inconvenient. I had been included because I made their system functional. That realization hit harder than any insult. Leela handed me copies of internal emails she had quietly saved. Not enough to prove everything, but enough to connect patterns, enough to show intent. You did not get this from me, she said. I shook my head. You did the right thing. For the first time since the dinner, I felt something close to momentum. But Natalie was not idle. Within days, rumors spread through the company. I was described as unstable, resentful, unable to accept leadership changes. Mason told staff I had misinterpreted routine financial adjustments. My mother called two extended relatives and framed the situation as a painful misunderstanding fueled by my inability to let go. They were building their own alliance network, social pressure, reputation control, narrative dominance. Classic. What they underestimated was how fragile those narratives become when they collide with documented truth. Eleanor began her review and quickly confirmed irregularities in expense routing. Daniel initiated preliminary communication with the bank, which triggered quiet monitoring protocols. Lila continued feeding me internal shifts in behavior. And then something unexpected happened. Harold reached out, not publicly, not through Natalie, directly to me. He requested a meeting. Every instinct told me to refuse. He had stood at that dinner and watched them try to erase me. He had been part of the machinery. But another instinct, sharper, now told me something else. People like Harold do not move without reason. We met in his office 2 days later. He looked older than he had at the dinner, though it had only been a matter of days. Tired, perhaps, or calculating. You escalated quickly, he said. You underestimated me, I replied. A faint smile, perhaps. He leaned back, studying me. You should understand that what you are doing will not only affect your sister, it will affect your mother. The entire estate structure could be called into question. That is not a warning, I said. That is a consequence. Silence stretched between us. Then he did something I did not expect. He slid a document across the desk. It was a preliminary draft of the trust amendment, different from the final version I had, less aggressive in its language, more balanced. This was the original proposal, he said quietly. I looked up sharply. What changed? He did not answer directly. After your father passed, your family dynamics shifted rapidly. Certain pressures were applied. Your mother was not in a position to evaluate them clearly. That was as close to an admission as he was willing to give. Did you inform me, I asked? Number. Did you ensure I had a representation? Number. Then you participated. He did not deny it. Instead, he said, if this proceeds publicly, everything will come out. Not just what your sister did, what everyone allowed. There it was again. The same appeal to collective damage. I leaned forward. Then maybe it is time everything comes out. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he nodded once slowly. I suspected you would say that. When I left his office, I understood something important. The lines were no longer clean. Alliances were forming, but they were unstable. Some were built on truth, others on self-preservation. And somewhere in between, people like Harold were deciding which side history would place them on. The pressure was building, and I knew deep down that it would break soon. The betrayal did not come from where I expected. It came from someone I had already started to trust. 3 days after my meeting with Harold, Lila stopped responding. At first, I assumed she was busy or being cautious. But by the end of the day, a quiet unease settled in. The next morning, I received an email from company HR. It stated that an internal review had uncovered unauthorized data extraction linked to my credentials. It accused me of removing sensitive company information for personal use. It referenced internal witness statements supporting the claim. Witness statements. My chest tightened. I already knew. Still, I opened the attached document. There it was. Lila's name. She claimed I had pressured her into sharing internal communications, that I had manipulated her into believing there was misconduct, that I intended to use the information to damage the company after being removed from leadership consideration. The words blurred for a moment before snapping back into focus. Not confusion. Clarity. Natalie had found her. Or Lila had gone to Natalie first. Either way, the result was the same. My first real ally had become my first public liability. The timing was surgical. The accusation reframed everything. Instead of being the one exposing misconduct, I was now positioned as a disgruntled employee stealing data. Classic inversion. And effective. Within hours, Daniel called. They moved faster than expected, he said. They turn my witness, I replied. Then we adjust, he said, calm but firm. Do you still have independent evidence? Yes. Then this becomes a credibility battle. And right now, they are trying to win it before formal review begins. That was the real danger. Not losing truth, losing timing. Because in cases like this, whoever controls the narrative early shapes how the truth is received later. Eleanor's tone was less measured. They are attempting preemptive damage control, she said. This suggests they are worried. Or confident, I said. No, she replied. Confident people do not fabricate internal theft claims this quickly. They are afraid of what you have. That should have reassured me. It did not, because fear makes people reckless. And reckless people do not always follow predictable patterns. By afternoon, I received a formal cease and desist letter from Harold's office. It demanded that I return all company materials, refrain from contacting employees, and stop making defamatory statements. So he had chosen a side, or at least he had chosen to protect himself by aligning visibly with them. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had first laid out the evidence, and felt something I had not allowed myself yet. Doubt, not about the facts, about the outcome. Because for the first time, I was not just fighting my family. I was fighting their version of reality, and they had more experience shaping it. That night, my mother called again. I answered. Her voice was tight, controlled. You need to stop, she said. They are accusing me of theft, I replied. You brought this on yourself. There it was. Not even a pause, not even curiosity, just immediate alignment. They altered the trust, I said. They moved company funds. You saw the documents. I saw your interpretation, she said. That distinction cut deeper than I expected. My interpretation, I repeated. Yes, she said. You always see things in the worst possible way. I closed my eyes, because suddenly I understood something I had resisted for years. It was not that my mother did not see the truth. It was that she chose the version of it that required the least disruption to her sense of family. And that version did not include me being right. If this continues, she added, you will lose everything. I let the silence sit. Then I said quietly, I already did. She hung up. For a long time, I sat there staring at nothing. The alliance I had built was fractured. My credibility was under attack. My own mother had chosen their side without hesitation. This was the lowest point. The part of the story where most people step back, accept a quieter loss, and rebuild somewhere else. For a moment, I understood why. It would be easier, cleaner, less destructive. But then I looked at the evidence again. At the patterns. At the years of quiet manipulation that led to this exact moment. And something in me settled. Not anger. Not even determination. Something colder. Clarity. If they wanted to turn me into the villain, then I would stop trying to be understood. I would focus on being undeniable. Because they had made one mistake. They thought breaking my alliance would break my case. They were wrong. They had only changed the way I would win. The morning after Lila's statement circulated, I stopped reacting and started structuring. Emotion had carried me this far, but it would not carry me through what came next. I needed sequence verification and a final layer of proof that could not be reframed, reinterpreted, or dismissed as personal conflict. Daniel and Eleanor both agreed on one thing. We needed something decisive. Not patterns, not testimony, not interpretation. Something direct. The break came from an unexpected direction. 3 days after the accusation against me, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another legal notice or a journalist fishing for a statement after rumors had begun circulating. But something made me answer. "This is Ava," I said. A pause. Then a man's voice, low controlled. "My name is Victor Hale. I believe you have been asking questions about Blue Aster Advisory." My body went still. "Yes," I said carefully. Another pause. "I used to manage one of the accounts connected to that entity," he continued. "Until recently." "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because I resigned," he said. "And because what I saw is not being handled the way it should be." I did not interrupt. "People like Victor do not call without purpose." "I have documentation," he said. "Direct authorization instructions, recorded calls, payment routing confirmations, names attached, dates aligned." Every word tightened something in my chest. "Why not go directly to authorities?" I asked. "I am," he replied. "But I was advised that you initiated the first report. That makes you relevant." Relevant. Not emotional, not personal. Relevant. That was exactly what I needed to become again. We arranged a meeting that same evening in a neutral office space Daniel secured. Victor arrived with a single case, nothing excessive, nothing theatrical. When he opened it, what he laid out was more than evidence. It was confirmation. Signed directives from Natalie authorizing altered invoice routing. Voice recordings where Mason discussed cycling funds through consulting layers to avoid internal visibility. Email chains connecting Stonewake billing to Trevor's holding structure. Timestamped transfers that aligned perfectly with the patterns I had already identified. And most importantly, a recorded conversation. Natalie's voice. Clear, unfiltered. "As long as Ava keeps handling reconciliation, we can redirect before final closure. She will question it, but by then it is already distributed." The room went silent after the audio ended. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This changes everything," he said. No, this ended everything. Because now the case was no longer constructed from interpretation. It was built from their own words. We moved immediately. Daniel escalated the case to formal investigation channels with full evidence integration. Eleanor prepared a structured financial report that mapped every irregularity with supporting documentation. Victor submitted his materials through official compliance pathways, ensuring chain integrity. And I did something else. I prepared for the moment they would realize the ground had disappeared beneath them. It did not take long. The first sign came from the bank. Account activity was flagged. Certain transfers were frozen pending review. The second came from Harold. He called again. His voice was different this time, less controlled. "What have you done?" he asked. "I told the truth," I replied. "You have triggered a full review," he said. "Do you understand the implications?" "Yes," I said. "Do you?" Silence. Then quietly, "There are recordings, are there not?" I did not answer. I did not need to. That was enough. By the next morning, everything accelerated. Natalie attempted damage control. Internal emails framed the investigation as a misunderstanding. Mason tried to reassure staff that operations would continue as normal. My mother called twice, then stopped when I did not answer. But the system had already moved beyond them. Because once evidence enters official channels with corroboration, it no longer belongs to the people who created the problem. It belongs to the process. And the process does not care about family. Late that afternoon, Daniel sent me a single message. "They are requesting formal interviews." I stared at the screen. This was it. The shift from hidden conflict to documented exposure. From controlled narrative to recorded truth. From family power to external accountability. I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. Because for the first time since this began, I knew something with absolute certainty. No matter what they said next, no matter how they tried to twist it, no matter who they blamed, the truth was now stronger than their version of it, and it was about to be heard. The collapse did not happen all at once. It unfolded in layers. First came the interviews. Natalie maintained composure at the beginning. She framed every decision as strategic, every irregularity as administrative error, every connection as coincidence. Mason followed the same pattern, leaning on confusion, deflection, and selective memory. But recordings do not forget, and documents do not hesitate. As evidence was presented piece by piece, their narratives began to fracture. Small contradictions appeared first, then larger ones, then silence where answers should have been. Trevor attempted distance, claiming limited involvement. The financial trails disagreed. Harold cooperated carefully, positioning himself as an advisor who had been misled. Whether that was fully true no longer mattered. His early alignment with Natalie had already been documented. My mother's role was quieter, but no less significant. Her approval signatures, her refusal to question changes, her reliance on Natalie's explanations, all of it became part of the record. Not criminal in the same way, but not innocent either. By the time formal findings were assembled, the story was no longer a family dispute. It was a system. And that system had been exposed. Natalie faced the consequences first. Removal from all operational authority, legal action tied to financial misconduct, public damage that no carefully curated image could contain. The same social circles that once admired her began to distance themselves with quiet efficiency. Mason followed, less calculated, more careless. His involvement was easier to trace. His confidence disappeared quickly once the structure protecting him collapsed. The same charm that once excused everything now sounded hollow. Trevor's holdings were audited, connections unraveled, assets were questioned, and for the first time the illusion of control they had built began to dissolve completely. I watched all of it from a distance, not out of indifference, but because I understood something I had not before. Justice is not loud. It does not need to be. It moves steadily, replacing illusion with consequence until there is nothing left to hide behind. My mother came to see me weeks later, not to argue, not to defend, to sit. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, structurally, like the role she had relied on no longer supported her the same way. I did not think it would go this far, she said. I studied her for a long moment. It was always this far, I replied. You just chose not to look. Tears filled her eyes, but I did not move to comfort her. Not because I did not feel anything, because I had spent years feeling everything alone. I thought keeping peace mattered more, she whispered. That was not peace, I said gently. That was avoidance. We sat in silence after that, not resolved, but honest. And that was more real than anything we had shared in years. The company did not survive in its original form, but parts of it did. Eleanor helped restructure the remaining operations under transparent governance. Daniel ensured compliance frameworks were rebuilt from the ground up. Victor continued cooperating until every thread was accounted for. And me, I stayed, not as the overlooked daughter, not as the silent fixer, as someone who had finally stepped out of a role that never belonged to me. The strangest part was what came after. The absence of noise, no constant tension, no quiet resentment, no need to prove anything to people committed to misunderstanding me. In that space, something new formed. Not a repaired family, a chosen one. People who valued truth over comfort, accountability over image, respect over hierarchy. It was smaller, but it was real, and for the first time that was enough. If you have ever been in a position where telling the truth meant risking everything, I want to ask you something. Would you do it again knowing what it costs? Tell me in the comments. If this story stayed with you, press like so more people can see what happens when silence finally breaks. Subscribe if you want more stories where justice is not immediate but it is inevitable. Share this with someone who still believes keeping peace is always the right choice. Thank you for staying through this with me. And wherever you are, I hope you choose truth before it is chosen for you.